The frozen biker's heart stopped beating on Frank Morrison's diner floor at 11:47 p.m. Frank dropped to his knees, pressed his palms against the stranger's chest, and started pumping. 1, 2, 3, while ice crystals melted off a leather vest covered in Hell's Angels patches. The man had no wallet, no money, no identification, just blue lips, a fading pulse, and the kind of desperate eyes that made Frank ignore every instinct, screaming to call the police instead of an ambulance. He saved that stranger's life with CPR and black coffee. What Frank couldn't know was that single act of mercy would expose his town's most powerful man as a monster, bring 200 motorcycles roaring into Kansas, and force him to choose between everything his dead wife built and everything she believed in. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Comment your city below so we can see how far this story has traveled. Frank Morrison was counting $14 when the door blew open and a dead man walked in. That's what he looked like anyway, a corpse stumbling out of the blizzard with ice in his beard and skin the color of old milk. The stranger made it 3 steps before his legs quit, and he hit the floor hard enough to crack his chin on the tile. Frank was around the counter before he knew he'd moved. Hey, stay with me." The man's eyes rolled back. His whole body shook like an engine throwing rods, and the cold coming off him. Frank had never felt anything like it, like touching a block of ice wrapped in leather. That's when he saw the patches. Hell's Angels, right there on the vest, death's head grinning up at him like a warning. Frank's hand stopped halfway to the man's shoulder. 20 years ago, a Hell's Angel had beaten his cousin half to death outside a bar in Wichita. 15 years ago, the news ran stories about them running drugs through small towns, just like Miller's Creek. Every instinct Frank had said to call the sheriff and step back, but Molly's voice was louder than instinct. "Hungry souls deserve hot food, Frank. The money works itself out." "All right," Frank muttered. "All right, Molly, I hear you." He grabbed the stranger under the arms and pulled. The man's name was Jake Brennan. He said it through chattering teeth while Frank wrapped hot towels around his hands. People call me Frost." "Frost," Frank almost laughed. "That's either perfect or terrible right now." "But both." Jake tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "Bike broke down, 5 miles east, maybe 6, started walking." "In this?" Frank gestured at the window. Snow was still coming down sideways, thick enough to erase the street. "You're lucky you're not dead in a ditch." "Luck's got nothing to do with my life, friend. Luck packed up and left about 20 years back." Frank positioned the space heater closer. "Can you feel your fingers yet?" Jake flexed them slowly, winced. "Starting to. Feels like someone's shoving needles under my nails." "That's good. Means the blood's moving." Frank stood. "I'm going to get you something hot to eat." "Wait." Jake's hand shot out and grabbed Frank's wrist. The grip was weak, but desperate. "I gotta tell you something first. It can wait until—" "No, it can't." Jake's eyes were clearer now, focused despite the shivering. "I can't pay. Not for food, not for coffee, not for anything. I got nothing on me. Lost my wallet 3 days ago somewhere in Oklahoma. Every cent I had was in that wallet." Frank looked down at the hand on his wrist. Swollen knuckles, old scars, a tattoo peeking out from under the sleeve that looked like flames. "So you're telling me," Frank said slowly, "that a Hell's Angel walked 5 miles through a blizzard, nearly died on my floor, and now you're worried about paying for a cup of coffee?" "I'm telling you so you can make a choice. Most people see this vest, and they don't want nothing to do with me. I'm giving you the chance to walk away before you waste food on someone who can't pay you back." The words hung there between them. Frank thought about the foreclosure notice in his back pocket. $47,000. 30 days. He couldn't afford to give away free meals. He couldn't afford to keep the lights on. He couldn't afford the heating bill that was already past due. But he could still hear Molly's voice. "My wife had this rule," Frank said. She'd tell me every time I tried to turn someone away. She'd say, a man's dignity doesn't grow back once you've taken it. Your wife sounds smart. She was, smarter than me by a mile. Frank pulled his wrist free gently. She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. But I still hear her voice every time someone walks through that door. And right now she's telling me to stop talking and start cooking. He turned toward the kitchen. Hey, Jake's voice stopped him. What's your name? Frank. Frank Morrison. Frank. Jake nodded once, something shifting behind his eyes. I won't forget this. It's just food, son. No, Jake's voice was rough. It's not. Frank made the only thing he knew how to make well, Molly's meatloaf. Ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, ketchup glaze, simple stuff, comfort food. The kind of meal that tasted like someone cared whether you lived or died. He loaded the plate with mashed potatoes and green beans, grabbed the coffee pot, and carried everything out to the booth, where Jake sat wrapped in towels like a man rescued from a shipwreck. Jake stared at the plate. Then he stared at Frank. Then he stared at the plate again. He stopped, swallowed hard. This is too much. It's what we've got. Eat. Jake picked up the fork. His hands were still trembling, but not from the cold anymore. He cut off a piece of meatloaf, put it in his mouth, and closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't move. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. Damn, he whispered. That's real food. You sound surprised. I've been eating gas station garbage for 2 weeks. Jake took another bite, bigger this time. Chips, stale donuts, whatever I could afford, which wasn't much. He shook his head. This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen. Frank poured the coffee and sat down across from him. Not hovering, just present. Available if Jake wanted to talk, quiet if he didn't. Jake ate like a man who'd forgotten what meals were for. Not fast, he was too shaky for that, but steady, determined, like each bite was a step back towards something he'd lost. When the plate was empty, he set down the fork and wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Go ahead. Why are you still open? Frank frowned. What do you mean? It's almost midnight in the middle of a blizzard. Town looks half dead from what I saw walking in. But you're here. Lights on, coffee hot. Jake's eyes moved around the empty diner. What are you waiting for? The question hit closer to bone than Frank expected. I don't know anymore, he admitted. Habit, maybe. Stubbornness. My wife would have kept these doors open through a hurricane, so I figure I can handle a little snow. That's not an answer. No, I guess it's not. Frank looked at the photographs on the wall. Molly smiling. Molly laughing. Molly standing in front of this counter on opening day, 30 years younger and full of dreams. The truth is, this place is all I have left of her. Every time I lock that door, it feels like I'm letting go of something I promised to hold on to. Jake followed his gaze to the photographs. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or pain. She was beautiful, Jake said quietly. She was everything. Cancer? Pancreatic. Took her in 4 months. Frank's voice was steady, but only because he'd practiced. One day she was complaining about a backache. 4 months later, I was picking out a casket. I'm sorry. Me too, Frank turned back to Jake. But we're not here to talk about my problems. What about you? What's a Hell's Angel doing walking across Kansas in January with nothing but the clothes on his back? Jake stared into his coffee for a long moment. Running, he said finally. From what? Pick something. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. The law's not after me if that's what you're worried about. Did my time years ago, paid my debt. This is different. Different how? Jake set down the mug. His hands had stopped shaking, but they weren't steady either. They moved restlessly, like they needed something to hold. You ever wake up one morning and realize you don't recognize your own life? Like you've been sleepwalking for 20 years and suddenly the alarm goes off and you're standing somewhere you never meant to be? Can't say I have. Lucky you. Jake rubbed his face. I'm 45 years old. I've been riding with the club since I was 22. That's 23 years of brotherhood, loyalty, all that stuff they put on the patches and tattoos. And I believed in it. I still believe in it. But somewhere along the way, I lost track of why. Why what? Why any of it mattered? Jake's voice dropped. I've got a daughter, Frank, Sarah. She's 22 now, same age I was when I joined up. Haven't talked to her in 7 years. 7 years. She probably wouldn't recognize me if I walked past her on the street. Frank's chest tightened. What happened? I happened. I was a lousy father, gone all the time. When I was home, I was drunk or high or angry. Her mother finally had enough and took her away, and I told myself I'd get clean and win them back. Did you? Get clean? Eventually. Win them back? Jake shook his head. By the time I got my act together, Sarah didn't want anything to do with me. Her mother remarried some accountant in Phoenix. New family, new life, no room for the screw-up in the leather vest. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. So you ran, Frank said. I got on my bike a week ago without telling anyone where I was going. Didn't know myself. Just started riding west, then north, then wherever the road went. Jake looked out the window at the snow still falling. Figured I'd ride until I found something worth stopping for, or until I ran out of road. And your bike breaking down? Universe's way of telling me to stop running, I guess. Jake turned back to Frank. Or maybe just its way of reminding me that I can't escape myself, no matter how far I go. Frank let the silence stretch for a moment. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded. Inside, the heater rattled, and the coffee maker dripped, and two strangers sat across from each other in a dying diner at the end of the world. You know what Molly would say right now? Frank asked. What? She'd say you didn't end up here by accident. She believed in that stuff. Fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. She'd say that bike breaking down exactly 5 miles from this door means something. You believe that? I believe my wife was usually right about things. Frank stood. Come on, there's a storage room in back with a cot. Not fancy, but it's warm. You can sleep there tonight. Jake's eyebrows shot up. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Frank, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I'm capable of. I know you walked 5 miles through a blizzard instead of breaking into someone's house to get warm. I know you told me you couldn't pay before you let me feed you. I know you're sitting here talking about your daughter like a man whose heart is broken, not like a man with no heart at all. Frank grabbed the empty plate. That's enough for me. Jake didn't move. Why? Why what? Why trust me? Why help me? Why do any of this? Frank set the plate on the counter and turned back. Because Molly always said every man deserves one person who believes in him. Someone who sees past the patches and the rap sheet and the mistakes and looks at who he could be instead of who he's been. Frank moved toward the kitchen. Tonight, I'm that person for you. Don't make me regret it. He disappeared through the swinging door. Jake sat alone in the empty diner, surrounded by photographs of a woman he'd never met, and the smell of coffee and the fading warmth of a meal that had cost him nothing and meant everything. His hand went to his vest, touched the patches. Death's head grinning. Hell's angels forever. 23 years of loyalty. 23 years of brotherhood. And tonight a stranger with nothing to gain had shown him more kindness than he'd felt in longer than he could remember. Jake bowed his head, and for the first time in 7 years, he prayed. Morning came gray and cold. The blizzard finally exhausted but the damage done. 3 feet of snow burying Miller's Creek like a white funeral shroud. Frank woke stiff and sore in the cab of his truck. He'd given Jake the only bed and couldn't face driving home in the storm, so he just reclined the seat and called it a night. At 58, his body made him pay for decisions like that. He climbed out into the frozen parking lot, breath fogging, bones creaking, and made his way inside expecting to find Jake still asleep. Instead, he found Jake standing at the grill with a spatula in his hand. "Morning." Jake didn't look up. "Hope you don't mind. Found some eggs in the walk-in." Frank blinked. "You cook?" "My mama made sure of it, said she'd skin me alive if I grew up helpless." Jake flipped an omelet with practiced ease. "Sit down, 2 minutes." Frank sat. 60 seconds later, Jake slid a plate in front of him. Omelet stuffed with cheese and peppers, bacon on the side, toast already buttered. Frank took a bite and his eyes widened. "This is good." "Don't act so surprised. I told you I had skills." Jake poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. "Listen, Frank, I've been thinking." "About?" "About how I can't pay you back with money I don't have. But I've got these." Jake held up his hands. "And I've got time. Plenty of time. Let me work for you." "Work how?" "Whatever you need. Dishes, cooking, cleaning. I saw that back door barely hanging on its hinges. I can fix that. The walk-in cooler's running loud, probably needs maintenance. That leak in the bathroom ceiling isn't going to patch itself." Jake leaned forward. "Let me earn my keep. Let me pay off what I owe with sweat instead of cash." Frank studied him. The sincerity in his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands stayed flat on the table, open, hiding nothing. "I can't pay you wages," Frank said. "I'm not asking for wages. I'm asking for a chance to be useful." Jake's voice tightened. "I've spent 23 years being useful for things I'm not proud of. Let me be useful for something good." The request hung there between them. Frank thought about the foreclosure notice. $47,000. 30 days, no, 29 now. He couldn't save this place with a handyman any more than he could save it with $14 a day. But he looked at Jake and he saw something he recognized. A man who needed to matter. "All right," Frank said. "We'll try it for a week. You work, you eat, you sleep and back. We'll see how it goes." Jake extended his hand across the table. Frank shook it. The first customer through the door was Martha Chen, same as every morning for 31 years. She was 74 years old, ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and could spot a stranger at 200 yards. She stopped dead when she saw Jake behind the counter. "Frank." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Who's that?" "That's Jake. He's helping out." Martha's eyes moved to the leather vest hanging on a hook near the kitchen. The patches were visible even from the door. "Hell's Angels," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Jake answered for himself. Martha stared at him. Jake stared back. Neither blinked. "You know how to make coffee?" Martha asked. "Yes, ma'am. Strong enough to wake the dead or gentle enough to let you sleep. Your choice." The faintest twitch at the corner of Martha's mouth. "Strong. I'll be at my usual spot." She moved past him to the counter, pulled out her crossword puzzle, and didn't say another word. Jake poured her coffee, strong, black, exactly right, and set it in front of her without comment. She took a sip, nodded once. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Frank let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The morning passed the way mornings in Miller's Creek always did. Slowly, quietly, like time itself had lost interest in the place. A few more customers trickled in. Old Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store that was barely hanging on. Sheriff Mike Jennings grabbing coffee before his shift. A young mother named Jessica Reynolds with a toddler who kept trying to grab the salt shaker. Each one looked at Jake with suspicion. Each one relaxed by inches when they saw Frank treating him like part of the furniture. Jake worked hard and kept his mouth shut. By noon, he'd washed every dish in the place, cleaned the grill until it sparkled, fixed the bathroom door that had been sticking for 3 months, and replaced the burnt-out bulb in the parking lot light. "You weren't kidding about those skills," Frank admitted. "Told you." Jake was elbow-deep in the walk-in cooler, cleaning the condenser coils. "My father was a contractor. I could frame a house by the time I was 16. "What happened?" Jake's hands paused. "He died." Accident on a job site. I was 18. Went a little crazy after that. Found the club. Found a different kind of family. He resumed cleaning. Better and worse, all at once. Frank wanted to ask more, but the front door slammed open, and conversation became impossible. Harold Whitmore walked in like he owned the place, which, Frank reminded himself, he practically did. Whitmore was 56 years old, silver-haired, and tailored from head to toe. He ran First Kansas Bank, sat on the town council, and had been circling Molly's kitchen like a vulture for 15 years. Today, the vulture was ready to land. Frank. Whitmore didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the diner, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the room like an auctioneer sizing up inventory. We need to talk. Harold, what can I do for you? You can start by explaining why there's a convicted felon working in your establishment. The word hit like a slap. Convicted felon. Jake went still in the kitchen doorway. Jake's not, Frank started. Jake Brennan, age 45, 2 counts of assault in 1999, distribution of controlled substances in 2003, 18 months at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. Whitmore smiled thinly. I made some calls this morning. Your new friend has quite the resume. Frank looked at Jake. Jake's face had gone blank. The careful emptiness of a man who'd learned to show nothing under pressure. That true? Frank asked. The convictions are true. Jake's voice was flat. The circumstances were complicated. Circumstances don't matter. Whitmore moved closer to the counter. What matters is that you've got a violent criminal residing on property that's collateral for a seriously delinquent loan. That's a violation of our agreement, Frank. What agreement? Whitmore pulled a folded document from his coat. Section 14, paragraph 3. The borrower agrees to maintain the property in a manner consistent with community standards and applicable laws. He let the paper drop on the counter. Having a Hell's Angel living on premises definitely violates community standards. He's not living here, he's working here. Same difference. Whitmore's smile widened. Given these new circumstances, I'm accelerating the foreclosure timeline. You now have 14 days instead of 30. The words punched through Frank's chest like a fist. You can't do that. I can. I am. It's all there in the contract you signed. Whitmore tapped the document. Of course, if you'd prefer a cleaner solution, I'm prepared to make an offer. Sign the property over to the bank right now, and I'll forgive the remaining balance. No foreclosure on your credit. No public embarrassment. You walk away clean. Frank's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the counter to hide it. This diner was my wife's dream. Your wife is dead, Frank. Whitmore said it the way someone might say the weather is cold. Just a fact, no emotion. Dreams don't survive the dreamers. What you've got here isn't a legacy, it's a liability. Something shifted in the air. Jake stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Whitmore take a half step back. You want to talk business with Frank, that's his choice. But you're going to apologize for what you just said about his wife. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me. Jake didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. Apologize, now. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to say you're sorry for disrespecting a dead woman who can't defend herself. Then you're going to conduct whatever business you came to conduct like a civilized human being. Or you're going to leave. The diner was silent. Martha Chen had stopped pretending to read her crossword. Old Tom Bradley was frozen with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Whitmore's face flushed red. He looked at Jake, really looked, and whatever he saw made him recalculate. I apologize, he said through clenched teeth. That was insensitive. Thank you. Jake stepped back. Frank, did you have anything else you wanted to discuss with Mr. Whitmore? Frank found his voice. No, I think we're done here. Good. Whitmore snatched the document off the counter. 14 days, Frank. Get your affairs in order." He walked out without looking back. The door slammed shut behind him. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jake exhaled and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For having a record, for giving him ammunition." Jake shook his head. "If I hadn't been here, he would have found another excuse." Frank sank onto a stool. His legs were shaking almost as badly as his hands. "Whitmore's been trying to get this property for years. He made Molly an offer 10 years ago, wanted to tear down the diner and build some fancy restaurant. She told him to go to hell. He's been waiting for his chance ever since."
"What's the history?"
"Besides him being a heartless vulture," Frank laughed bitterly, "the man's been running this town for 2 decades, owns the bank, owns half the property in Miller's Creek, owns most of the town council. Whatever he wants, he gets. And right now, he wants us gone." Jake sat down across from him. "How bad is it, really?" "How bad is what?" "The money situation. How much do you actually owe?" Frank hesitated. It felt wrong to share something so shameful, so personal, with someone he'd known less than 24 hours. But Jake had just stared down the most powerful man in town for him. That had to count for something. $47,000, Frank said. "Behind on the mortgage, behind on taxes, behind on everything. Molly's medical bills wiped out our savings. I've been running on fumes for 2 years. And now you've got 2 weeks instead of 4. Now I've got 2 weeks instead of 4. Frank rubbed his eyes. "Not that it matters. I couldn't come up with $47,000 in 4 years, let alone 4 weeks. Jake was quiet for a long moment. His fingers drummed on the table, a nervous habit Frank hadn't noticed before. "What if I could help?" "Help how? You don't have any money either." "No." Jake's eyes met his. "But I have something else. I have brothers." The call was made at 6:47 p.m. after the dinner rush, if 3 customers could be called a rush, had ended and the diner was closed. Jake stood in the parking lot with his cracked flip phone pressed to his ear. Frank watched from the window, unable to hear the words but reading the body language. Urgent, emphatic, almost pleading. 20 minutes later, Jake came back inside. His face was different, harder somehow, like he'd made a decision that changed the shape of his skull. "That was Marcus," Jake said. "Your accountant friend? Former club brother. He went straight about 5 years ago. Got his degree while he was inside. Works for a firm in Kansas City now. And he's going to look into Whitmore. Says the name rang a bell. Something about property dealings that didn't smell right." Jake sat down heavily. "He's also going to make some other calls." "What kind of calls?" "To people who might want to help." Frank's stomach tightened. "Jake, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't take money from—" "It's not about money," Jake cut him off. "Not directly. It's about—" He paused, searching for words. "When you've been in the club as long as I have, you build up what we call capital. Favors owed. Brothers who'd ride through fire for you because you did the same for them once. I've never cashed in on any of it, never asked for anything. And now? Now I'm asking." Jake's voice was rough. "I'm asking for you." Frank didn't know what to say. Didn't know what he was feeling. Gratitude? Fear? The strange vertigo of having his life picked up and spun in a new direction? "Jake, why? You've known me less than 2 days. Why would you stick your neck out like this?" Jake stared at the table for a long moment before answering. "Because you gave me coffee when everyone else would have given me the door. Because you saw a man instead of a monster. Because somewhere in this world, my daughter is 22 years old, and I hope, I pray, that if she ever stumbled into trouble, someone would help her the way you helped me." His voice cracked on the last words. "That's it?" Frank asked. "That's everything." Jake looked up. "I've spent 2 decades being loyal to people I chose. My brothers in the club, my riding partners, men I'd die for and who'd die for me. but I've never had anyone choose me without knowing what they were getting. You chose me, Frank. You chose to help a stranger with Hell's Angels patches and a rap sheet and nothing to offer in return. He paused. Nobody's ever done that before. Nobody. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let that kind of goodness get crushed by some banker in a fancy suit. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither man knew how to say. Finally, Frank nodded. All right, make your calls. See what you can find out about Whitmore. He stood. But Jake, whatever happens, I don't want anyone getting hurt. Not for me, not for this diner. Understood? Understood. Good. Frank grabbed his coat. I'm going home to get some actual sleep. Be back at 5. Don't burn the place down while I'm gone. Wouldn't dream of it. Frank paused at the door. And Jake? Yeah? Thank you for standing up to Whitmore today. Nobody's done that for me in a long time. Jake nodded once. That's what brothers do. Frank left. The cold hit him like a wall, but he barely felt it. Something had changed. Something was moving now, picking up speed, heading toward a destination he couldn't see. He just hoped they could survive wherever it was going. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay on the cot in the storage room, phone on his chest, waiting for messages that came in fragments throughout the dark hours. From Marcus at 11:34 p.m., Whitmore's dirty, still digging, more tomorrow. From Danny Wrench Williams at 12:47 a.m., how many brothers you need? From a number Jake hadn't seen in 5 years, Big Mike Castellano, chapter president in Oklahoma City, at 2:15 a.m. Frost, heard you found trouble. Call me. Jake didn't call, not yet. He wanted to know more before he started that avalanche rolling. But the messages kept coming, words spreading through the network like fire through dry grass. Someone in Kansas needed help, someone who'd ridden with them, bled with them, done time without snitching or complaining. Jake had never asked for anything in 23 years. Now he was asking, and his brothers were answering. He thought about Frank, probably asleep by now in whatever modest house he went home to. Frank with his dead wife's photographs and his dying diner, and his stubborn refusal to stop believing in people. He thought about Whitmore, probably sleeping in some expensive bed in some expensive house, dreaming expensive dreams about the property he was going to steal. And he thought about himself, Jake Brennan, Frost, 45 years old, felon, failure, father to a daughter who'd forgotten his face. But maybe, there was still time to be something else. Maybe there was still time to matter. His phone buzzed again. Marcus. Found it. Whitmore's been buying foreclosed properties through shell companies for 15 years, selling to developers at massive markup. Town doesn't know. Call me at 8. Jake read the message 3 times. Then he smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that came from a place most people pretended didn't exist. Harold Whitmore thought he was hunting a dying diner. He didn't know he'd just woken up something much more dangerous. Jake turned off his phone, closed his eyes, and let the darkness take him. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. The phone call with Marcus lasted 47 minutes. Jake stood in the parking lot at 8 a.m. sharp, breath fogging in the cold air, listening to words that made his blood run hot despite the temperature. Whitmore's been running this game for 15 years, Marcus said. His voice was different now, not the wild road dog Jake remembered, but something sharper, professional. Shell companies layered 3 deep. He forecloses on properties through the bank, buys them through his holding companies at auction for pennies, then flips them to developers out of Kansas City. How much are we talking? Conservative estimate? He's cleared $2 million off Miller's Creek alone. And that's just what I can trace. Jake's hand tightened on the phone. The town doesn't know? The town thinks he's a pillar of the community, serves on the council, donates to the church, sponsors the Little League team. Marcus laughed bitterly. Classic wolf in sheep's clothing. These small towns, They never see it coming. What about Frank's diner? That's the crown jewel, brother. The property sits on the corner of Main and Route 56. Prime real estate for anyone wanting to develop the area. Whitmore's been circling it for over a decade. The wife kept him at bay while she was alive. Now, Marcus paused. Now he smells blood. Jake watched through the window as Frank moved around inside the diner, preparing for another day that would bring more disappointment than customers. The man had no idea what he was up against. No idea that Whitmore wasn't just a greedy banker. He was a predator who'd been planning this kill for years. "What do we do?" Jake asked. "That depends on how far you want to take this." "All the way." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You sure? This isn't club business. Nobody would blame you for walking away." "I'm not walking anywhere." Jake's voice hardened. "This man took me in when I had nothing, fed me, gave me a place to sleep, treated me like a human being when he had every reason to slam the door in my face. I'm not going to watch some suit in a fancy car destroy everything he has left." "All right then." Marcus's tone shifted, the old fire creeping back in. "I'll keep digging on my end. But Frost, you're going to need boots on the ground. You're going to need brothers." "I know. Big Mike already called me. He's waiting to hear from you." Jake closed his eyes. Big Mike Castellano, Oklahoma City chapter president, the man who'd patched Jake in 23 years ago, the man who'd held his hand through his first stint in prison, the man who'd told him, on the day Jake rode out of town 2 weeks ago, that the door would always be open when he was ready to come home. "I'll call him," Jake said. "One more thing." Marcus's voice dropped. "I ran your name through some channels. Whitmore's already asking questions about you. He knows about Leavenworth. He's trying to find more." "Let him look. I've got nothing to hide." "We both know that's not entirely true." Jake's jaw tightened. "The things that aren't true are buried deep enough that no small-town banker is going to find them. Focus on Whitmore. I'll handle the rest." He hung up and stood there for a long moment, watching his breath dissolve into the frozen air. Then he walked inside to face the day. Frank was behind the counter, same as yesterday, same as every day for 30 years. But something was different this morning. His shoulders were a little straighter. His eyes were a little brighter. "You're up early," Frank said. "Couldn't sleep." Jake grabbed an apron. "What needs doing?" "Same as always. Everything." Frank poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the counter. "But first, sit down. We need to talk." Jake sat. Frank took a long sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about your brothers, about making calls." He set down the cup. "I need to know what I'm getting into here, Jake. I need to know what's coming." "I don't know yet. Not exactly." "Then tell me what you do know." Jake wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I know that Whitmore isn't just a banker who wants your property. He's a con man who's been bleeding this town dry for 15 years. Shell companies, rigged auctions. He forecloses on people, buys their land for nothing, and sells it to developers for a fortune." Frank's face went pale. "What?" "My friend Marcus, the accountant I told you about, he spent all night digging. Whitmore's stolen millions from Miller's Creek, and nobody knows." That's not possible. Harold's been on the town council for 20 years. He sponsors the Little League team, the church fundraiser, the 4th of July parade." Jake nodded. "Perfect cover. Who's going to suspect the guy who buys new uniforms for the kids every spring?" Frank stared at him. The color hadn't returned to his face. "All those families," he whispered. "The Hendersons lost their farm 3 years ago. The Williamses lost their store. Old Pete Garner lost everything after his wife got sick." His voice cracked. "That was all Whitmore?" "We don't have proof yet, but yeah, that's what it looks like." Frank's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the counter, the same gesture Jake had seen that first night. "Why?" Frank asked. "Why would someone do that to their own town?" "Money, power, because he can," Jake shrugged. Some men are just built wrong, Frank. They see other people as obstacles or opportunities, nothing else. Whitmore looks at Miller's Creek and he doesn't see families and history and dreams. He sees real estate. And my diner? Your diner is sitting on the most valuable corner in town. He's been waiting for this chance since your wife turned him down 10 years ago. The silence stretched between them. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Main Street, one of the few signs of life in a town that was slowly being strangled. What do we do? Frank finally asked. We fight. How? I'm a 60-year-old man who can barely keep the lights on. He's got lawyers and money and I've got brothers. Jake leaned forward. Frank, listen to me. I've been riding with Hell's Angels for 23 years. In that time, I've built relationships with men all over this country. Mechanics, contractors, lawyers. Yeah, we've got lawyers. Accountants like Marcus. Men who know how to dig up dirt and men who know how to use it. You're talking about going to war with the most powerful man in town. I'm talking about protecting a good man from a bad one. Jake's eyes were steady. The question is, are you willing to let me try? Frank looked at the photographs on the wall, Molly smiling, Molly laughing. Molly standing in this exact spot 30 years ago, full of hope and dreams. She would have told me to fight, Frank said quietly. Then fight. Frank turned back to Jake. Something had shifted in his eyes. The resignation replaced by something harder. Something that had been sleeping for 2 years and was finally waking up. All right, he said. Make your calls. Do what you need to do. But Jake? Yeah? Whatever happens, I don't want anyone getting hurt. Not the town, not your brothers, not you. Frank's voice was firm. We do this the right way, or we don't do it at all. Jake nodded slowly. The right way. I can work with that. The front door opened and Martha Chen walked in, same as every morning, crossword puzzle tucked under her arm. She looked at the two men standing at the counter with serious expressions. Am I interrupting something? She asked. No, ma'am. Jake moved toward the coffee pot. Just planning a revolution. Coffee? Martha raised an eyebrow. Strong, and I want details later. Yes, ma'am. Jake poured her coffee and watched her settle into her usual spot. Normal morning, normal routine, but nothing about this situation was normal anymore. He had calls to make. The first one was to Big Mike. The phone rang twice before that familiar gravelly voice answered. Frost, about damn time. Hey, Mike. Marcus filled me in. You've got yourself a situation. I've got myself a friend who needs help. Big Mike was quiet for a moment. In the background, Jake could hear the sounds of a garage, metal clanging, engines revving, the everyday music of the club's legitimate business operations. Tell me about this friend, Mike said. Jake told him. Everything. The blizzard, the collapse, the meal that cost nothing and meant everything. He told him about Molly and the photographs and the foreclosure notice. He told him about Whitmore and the shell companies and the 15 years of theft. When he finished, Big Mike was silent for a long moment. This diner man, Mike finally said, he know what you're asking for? He knows I'm making calls. He doesn't know what that means. Does he want to know? Jake glanced through the kitchen doorway at Frank, who was laughing at something Martha had said. A genuine laugh. The first one Jake had heard from him. I think he wants to believe there's still good in the world, Jake said. I'd like to prove him right. Big Mike grunted. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Another long pause. Then, how many brothers you need? Jake's heart kicked. You're in? You've never asked for anything in 23 years, Frost. Not when you were inside. Not when your marriage fell apart. Not when things got bad. You've always handled your business alone. Mike's voice softened. Maybe that was pride. Maybe that was strength. But a man who never asks for help is a man who never lets anyone help him. And that's a lonely way to live. Jake couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. So, yeah, Mike continued, I'm in. I'll make some calls. We'll get you what you need. Mike, I don't know how to. Don't. Don't thank me until we see how this plays out. Mike's tone hardened. But Frost, when this is over, you and me are going to have a talk about where you've been and where you're going. You disappeared for 2 weeks without a word. That's not how family works. I know. Good. Sit tight. Help's coming. The line went dead. Jake stood in the parking lot, phone pressed against his chest, and felt something shift inside him. For 23 years, he'd been part of a brotherhood. He'd bled for it, done time for it, given everything he had to it, but he'd never really let it in. He'd kept one foot out the door, always ready to run, always convinced that eventually everyone would see the truth, that he was broken, worthless, not worth saving. Frank had seen through that in one night. Maybe it was time Jake started seeing through it too. 3 days passed. 3 days of cooking and cleaning and fixing things that had been broken for months. 3 days of watching Frank serve customers who came in ones and twos, loyal regulars keeping a dying dream alive through sheer stubbornness. 3 days of waiting. On the 4th morning, Jake heard them before he saw them. The rumble started low, like distant thunder, but it didn't fade. It grew, louder, closer, the kind of sound that made windows vibrate and hearts beat faster. Frank looked up from the register. "What is that?" Jake smiled. "That's the cavalry." The first bike appeared at the end of Main Street, then another, then another. A river of chrome and leather flowing into Miller's Creek like nothing the town had ever seen. 15 motorcycles, 15 Hells Angels, patches from 3 different chapters, Oklahoma City, Wichita, Kansas City. They pulled into the parking lot of Molly's Kitchen in perfect formation, engines dying one by one until the silence felt louder than the noise had been. Frank stood frozen behind the counter. Big Mike Castellano climbed off his bike first. He was 62 years old, built like a barrel, with a gray beard that reached his chest, and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He walked through the front door like he owned the place. Then he stopped, looked around, took in the photographs on the wall, the clean counter, the smell of coffee and bacon. "Nice place," he said. Jake stepped forward. "Mike, thank you for coming." "Shut up." Mike pulled him into a bear hug that drove the air from Jake's lungs. "You look like hell, Frost." "Feel like it too." Mike released him and turned to Frank, who still hadn't moved. "You must be Frank Morrison." Frank nodded slowly. "That's me. I'm Big Mike. I'm the man who's going to help you keep your diner." He extended a massive hand. "It's good to meet you." Frank shook it. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what's happening." "What's happening is that a brother asked for help, and his brothers answered." Mike glanced around at the other bikers filing through the door. "These men rode through the night to be here. Some of them took time off work. Some of them left their families. All of them came because Frost said there was a good man in trouble." Frank looked at Jake. "You did this?" "I made some calls." "Calls?" Frank's voice cracked. "There's 15 Hells Angels in my parking lot because you made some calls?" 16, Mike corrected. "Danny's taking a leak around back." Frank sat down heavily on the nearest stool. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything." Mike clapped him on the shoulder. "Just tell me what's for breakfast. My boys are hungry." The next hour was chaos. The diner that usually served 4 customers a day was suddenly packed with 16 hungry bikers, all of them ordering everything on the menu. Frank and Jake worked side by side in the kitchen, cooking faster than they'd ever cooked before. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, hash browns, toast, coffee by the gallon, the register filled with cash, real cash, 20s and 50s, tips that would have seemed insane if the circumstances weren't already surreal. But more than the money, there was something else. Something Frank hadn't felt in years. Life. The diner was alive again, full of noise and laughter and the kind of energy that Molly had always dreamed of. Men telling stories, arguing about engines, debating the best routes across the Great Plains. Martha Chen sat in her usual spot, crossword puzzle forgotten, watching the scene with wide eyes. "Frank," she said when he brought her a coffee refill, "what in the world is going on?" "I'm not entirely sure, Martha." Frank looked around at the packed tables. "But I think I'm being rescued." By noon, word had spread through Miller's Creek like wildfire. Hell's Angels at Molly's kitchen. 15 of them, maybe 20. The numbers grew with each retelling. Sheriff Mike Jennings showed up at 12:30, hand resting on his holster, face tight with concern. "Frank," he nodded at the bikers, "want to tell me what's happening here?" Before Frank could answer, Big Mike stood up. "Sheriff." His voice was calm, respectful. "My name's Mike Castellano. I'm the president of the Oklahoma City chapter of Hell's Angels. These are my brothers. We're here to eat breakfast and support a local business. That's all." Jennings didn't relax. "That's a lot of motorcycles for breakfast." "We're very hungry." A few of the bikers chuckled. Jennings didn't. "I've got calls coming in from all over town. People are scared." "Of what?" Mike spread his hands. "We're eating pancakes. Nobody's causing trouble. Nobody's breaking laws. We're just customers. Customers who rode in from 3 states. We like to travel." Mike stepped closer to the sheriff. "Look, I understand your concern, I do. You've got a job to do and you want to protect your town. I respect that. But I'm asking you to judge us by our actions, not our patches. We're going to eat, we're going to pay, we're going to leave a nice tip, and then we're going to sit here quietly and drink coffee until we decide what to do next." "What does that mean? What to do next?" "It means we're not leaving until we're sure our friend is safe." Jennings looked at Frank. "You know these people?" Frank hesitated, looked at Jake, looked at Big Mike, looked at the 14 other bikers who'd ridden through the night for a stranger they'd never met. "Yeah," he said finally, "I know them. They're friends." The sheriff stood there for a long moment, calculating. Then he sighed. "All right, I'm going to trust you, Frank. But if anything happens—" "Nothing's going to happen." Big Mike's voice was firm. "You have my word." Jennings nodded once and left. Through the window, they watched him sit in his cruiser for a few minutes before finally driving away. "That went well," Jake muttered. "Could have been worse." Mike sat back down. "Now, let's talk about this banker." They gathered in the back corner of the diner. Mike, Jake, Frank, and 3 other brothers. Danny Wrench Williams, a former Army mechanic with hands like sledgehammers. Bobby Books Martinez, who'd gone to law school after getting out of prison and now ran a small practice in Kansas City. And Tommy Chen, a forensic accountant who'd ridden all the way from Wichita when he heard what was happening. No relation to Martha, who was still watching from her spot at the counter. "Here's what we know," Marcus said through the speakerphone in the center of the table. He'd been too far away to ride in, but was running point on the research. "Harold Whitmore has been running a property scheme in Miller's Creek for 15 years. He identifies vulnerable homeowners, elderly folks, people with medical debt, anyone facing hard times. Then he accelerates their loan problems through the bank, forecloses, and buys the properties through shell companies at auction." "How does he get away with the auctions?" Bobby asked. "Those are supposed to be open to the public." "He schedules them at weird times, buries the notices, and anyone who does show up to bid gets discouraged when they see who they're bidding against." "Discouraged how?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "There have been some convenient accidents, cars with slashed tires, a barn that burned down. Nothing that can be traced directly to Whitmore, but people get the message," Big Mike finished. "Exactly." Frank's face had gone gray. "I knew times were hard. I knew people were losing their places. But I thought it was just bad luck, the economy, the way small towns die." "It's not luck," Tommy said. He'd been scrolling through documents on his laptop. "It's systematic. Whitmore's been bleeding this town dry for years. And Frank, Your property is the biggest score he's ever gone after. How much is it worth? Tommy glanced at Jake, then back at Frank. Based on recent development deals in the area, if Whitmore gets your diner and the surrounding parcels, he could flip them to a hotel developer for close to $3 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. $3 million, Frank whispered, for a diner that can't clear $50 a day. Location, location, location. Tommy shook his head. It's not about the building, it's about what someone could build in its place. Big Mike leaned back in his chair. All right, so we know what we're dealing with. The question is, what do we do about it? Bobby pulled out a legal pad. Option 1, we take everything we found to the state attorney general, file a formal complaint, let the legal system handle it. How long would that take? Jake asked. Months, maybe years. And Frank doesn't have years. He's got 11 days now. What's option 2? Bobby hesitated. Option 2 is messier. We gather enough evidence to go public, contact the media, make Whitmore's scheme so visible that he can't complete the foreclosure without everyone knowing he's a crook. Would that stop him? Maybe, maybe not. A man like Whitmore probably has contingencies. Lawyers who can tie things up in court while he continues business as usual. Big Mike tapped his fingers on the table. What about option 3? What's option 3? We make him an offer he can't refuse. The table went quiet. Jake shook his head. Mike, we talked about this. Frank doesn't want anyone getting hurt. I'm not talking about hurting anyone. Mike's eyes were steady. I'm talking about leverage. Whitmore's got secrets. Everyone does. We find something he doesn't want made public, something that would destroy him, and we use it to negotiate. That's blackmail, Bobby said carefully. That's justice. Mike shrugged. Sometimes the system doesn't work for people like Frank. Sometimes you have to work outside the system. Frank had been silent through the whole exchange. Now he spoke up. No. Everyone turned to look at him. No blackmail, no threats, no leverage. Frank's voice was steady. I appreciate what you're all trying to do. I appreciate that you rode through the night for a stranger. But Molly didn't build this place so I could save it by becoming something she'd be ashamed of. Frank, Jake started. No, Frank held up a hand. I've spent the last 2 years trying to keep her dream alive. If I have to sacrifice what that dream meant to protect the building it happened in, then what's the point? I might as well let Whitmore have it. The silence stretched. Big Mike studied Frank for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. Molly was a lucky woman, he said. I was the lucky one. All right, Mike straightened up. We do this clean. Bobby, keep building the legal case. Tommy, I want a full forensic breakdown of every dirty deal Whitmore's ever done. We're going to expose this bastard so thoroughly that he'll never work in banking again. That still might not be fast enough, Bobby warned. Then we buy time. Mike looked at Jake. How do we buy time? Jake thought for a moment. The foreclosure requires a public notice and a waiting period. Whitmore accelerated the timeline, but he still has to follow the law. If we challenge the acceleration, argue that he doesn't have grounds, we might be able to push it back to the original 30 days. Can we do that? Bobby nodded slowly. I'd have to look at the loan documents, but yeah, maybe. It's a long shot, but maybe. Then that's what we do. Mike stood. Bobby, you work on the legal challenge. Tommy, you keep digging. The rest of us? He looked around at his brothers. We're going to eat a lot of pancakes and make sure everyone in this town knows that Molly's Kitchen has friends. Good friends. The kind of friends you don't want to mess with. Jake caught Frank's eye. You okay with this? Frank looked around at the bikers, these strangers who'd ridden through the night for him, who were putting their time and skills and reputations on the line for a man they'd never met. I'm okay with it, he said softly. I just don't understand why. Big Mike clapped him on the shoulder. Because once upon a time, a frozen biker stumbled into your diner with nothing but the clothes on his back and you fed him anyway. That's why. He squeezed Frank's shoulder. Kindness has a way of coming back around, Frank. Sometimes it just takes a while. That night, the bikers set up camp in the parking lot. They had tents and sleeping bags and a system for keeping watch that spoke of long experience on the road. Frank tried to argue, tried to insist they find real lodging, but Big Mike just laughed. Brother, we've slept in worse places than this. Trust me. So Frank made the biggest pot of coffee he'd ever made and kept it coming throughout the night. At 2 a.m., he found Jake sitting alone at the counter, staring at his phone. Can't sleep? Frank asked. Never could. Not since. Jake shook his head. Doesn't matter. Frank poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from him. Your daughter? Jake's jaw tightened. How'd you know? Lucky guess. Plus, you've got that look. What look? The one I had for about a year after Molly died. Like there's a hole in your chest where something important used to be. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed Frank a photograph. A young woman with dark hair and her father's eyes, standing in front of a Christmas tree, laughing at something out of frame. That's the last picture I have of her, Jake said. 7 years ago. She was 15. I was supposed to come home for Christmas, but I got tied up with club business and... He stopped, swallowed. She waited up until midnight. When I didn't show, she went to bed. Next morning, she told her mother she was done waiting for me. She was 15. Kids say things. She meant it. Jake's voice cracked. I tried calling, writing, showing up. She wouldn't see me. Her mother got remarried, moved to Phoenix. Eventually, I stopped trying. Why? Because I thought I was doing her a favor. She was better off without me. Her stepfather's a good man, accountant, stable, the kind of dad who shows up to soccer games and helps with homework. Everything I wasn't. Jake stared at the photograph. I told myself I was letting her go because I loved her. But the truth is, I was just too scared to keep fighting. Frank thought about Molly, about all the fights they'd had over the years. Stupid fights, serious fights, the kind of fights that made you wonder why you'd ever gotten married in the first place. But they'd always come back to each other, always found their way home. You know what Molly used to tell me? Frank said. She used to say that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. You choose to love someone every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's nice, but I'm not finished. Frank leaned forward. She also used to say that the only unforgivable sin is giving up, because as long as you're still fighting, there's still hope. The minute you stop fighting, that's when it's really over. Jake looked up from the phone. His eyes were wet. What are you saying? I'm saying you've got a daughter out there who probably thinks her father doesn't love her. And I'm saying that as long as you're both still breathing, it's not too late to prove her wrong. Frank, she won't even take my calls. Then stop calling. Frank shrugged. Show up. In person. Not to beg for forgiveness. Not to make excuses. Just to tell her you love her, and you're sorry, and you're not going to stop fighting for her. That's all any kid really wants, to know that their parent gives a damn. Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the phone, at the photograph of the daughter he'd abandoned. Maybe, he said softly, when this is over, maybe I'll try. Don't wait until this is over. Frank's voice was firm. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment doesn't exist. Trust me, I know. Before Jake could respond, the front door burst open. Danny Williams stood there, face tight with alarm. Boss needs you, both of you, now. They followed him out to the parking lot, where a small crowd had gathered around Big Mike's tent. Mike was holding a piece of paper, reading it by flashlight. His expression was unreadable. What is it? Jake asked. Mike handed him the paper without a word. Jake read it again, felt the blood drain from his face. What does it say? Frank demanded. Jake looked up slowly. Whitmore's filed an injunction. He's claiming the diner is a public nuisance and safety hazard. He's got the sheriff scheduled to come tomorrow morning. Jake's voice was hollow. He's shutting us down. Nobody slept that night. Bobby Martinez spread the injunction papers across the counter and read every word 3 times. His face got darker with each reading. "This is garbage," he finally said. "Complete and total garbage. But it's legal garbage, which means we have to deal with it." "How?" Jake asked. "Sheriff's coming at 9 a.m. That's 7 hours. The injunction claims the diner is a public nuisance due to the presence of known criminal elements, creating an atmosphere of intimidation." Bobby shook his head. "That's us, by the way. We're the criminal elements." Big Mike laughed bitterly. "We've been here 2 days. We've eaten breakfast, paid our bills, and fixed a broken fence out back. Some criminal element. Doesn't matter. Whitmore's got a judge in his pocket, Judge Patterson, been on the bench for 30 years. The injunction was signed at 11 p.m. tonight. That means Whitmore had this ready to go the minute he heard we were in town." Frank sank onto a stool. "So that's it? We're done?" "Not necessarily," Bobby pulled out his phone. "The injunction requires a hearing within 72 hours. If we can get a different judge, someone from outside the county, we might be able to get it thrown out." "Can you do that?" "I know a federal judge in Topeka. She owes me a favor." Bobby was already dialing. "But Frank, I need you to understand something. Even if we beat this injunction, Whitmore's not going to stop. He'll find another angle, another attack. This is going to be a war of attrition. Then we dig in." Jake's voice was hard. "We fight every battle until he runs out of ammunition. Or until we do." The call connected. Bobby stepped outside to talk, leaving the others in heavy silence. Tommy Chen had been working on his laptop the whole time, barely looking up. Now he spoke. "I found something." Everyone turned. Whitmore's shell company, the one he uses to buy foreclosed properties, it's called Heartland Development, LLC. I've been tracing its transactions for the past 3 hours. Tommy turned the laptop around. "Look at this." The screen showed a spreadsheet filled with numbers. To Frank, it was gibberish, but Jake leaned in and his eyes widened. "That's a lot of money. $14.6 million over 15 years. Tommy scrolled down. "But here's the interesting part. Heartland Development has a silent partner, someone who's been taking a cut of every deal." "Who?" Tommy clicked to another document. A name appeared on the screen. Judge Harold Patterson. The room went dead silent. "The judge," Frank whispered. "The judge who signed the injunction. The same judge who's been approving Whitmore's foreclosures for 15 years. Tommy's voice was grim. "They're partners, Frank. They've been running this scheme together from the beginning." Big Mike stood up slowly. "Can you prove it?" "I've got bank records, transfer statements, a paper trail that goes back to 2009. Tommy closed the laptop. "If this goes public, they're both finished. We're talking federal charges, racketeering, fraud, conspiracy." Jake felt something shift in his chest. Hope. Actual hope. "So we've got them," he said. "We've got leverage. We've got evidence." Tommy's expression was cautious. "Leverage requires someone to leverage it with. Right now, the only people who know about this are sitting in this room. Then we need to get it to someone who can use it." Big Mike pulled out his phone. "I know a reporter at the Kansas City Star, investigative journalist. She's been trying to nail Whitmore for years but never had the proof." Frank held up his hand. "Wait." Everyone looked at him. "Before we do anything, I need to understand what happens next. If we release this information, what happens to Miller's Creek?" Tommy hesitated. "The bank will probably fail. First, Kansas is small. It won't survive a scandal this big. Anyone with accounts there could lose access to their money, at least temporarily. What about the town, the people? Some of them might get their properties back. The foreclosures could be reversed if they were obtained through fraud, but it'll take years to sort out. Lawyers, courts, appeals." Tommy shrugged. "It's going to be messy." Frank stared at the counter, at the spot where Molly used to stand every morning, greeting customers with a smile that could light up the whole room. She used to say that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same. he said quietly. She used to say that's how you know which one is which. Frank? Jake touched his shoulder. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife. She comes in here every Sunday after church, orders a slice of pie and talks about her grandchildren. Frank's voice cracked. I'm thinking about her finding out her husband's been stealing from his own town for 15 years. Frank, that's not your responsibility. Maybe not, but it doesn't make it easier. He looked up at the faces around him, these strangers who'd become allies, these bikers who'd turned into brothers. Do it. Release the information. Expose them both. But I want to be there when Whitmore finds out. I want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him. Big Mike nodded slowly. That can be arranged. Bobby came back inside, phone still in his hand. Good news. Judge Williams in Topeka agreed to review the injunction. She's faxing an emergency stay right now. Sheriff can't shut us down until there's a proper hearing. When's the hearing? 3 days, but that might not matter anymore. Bobby noticed the mood in the room. What did I miss? Tommy turned the laptop around and showed him the screen. Bobby's jaw dropped. Holy shit. Yeah, Big Mike said. Holy shit is about right. Dawn broke gray and cold over Miller's Creek. The bikers had moved inside, filling every booth and corner of the diner with leather and chrome and the smell of road dust. Frank made coffee for 30 people and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like his diner was actually alive. At 8:45 a.m., Sheriff Jennings pulled into the parking lot. He sat in his cruiser for a long moment, staring at the building. Then he climbed out and walked to the door. Frank met him on the threshold. Morning, Mike. Frank. The sheriff's face was tight. I've got orders. I know. Injunction. Public nuisance. Criminal elements. Frank shrugged. I also know you got a fax from Judge Williams in Topeka about 20 minutes ago putting a stay on that injunction. Jennings blinked. How did you? We've got a good lawyer. The sheriff stood there, caught between his orders and the reality in front of him. Behind Frank, 16 Hell's Angels watched in silence. This is getting out of hand, Jennings said quietly. Whatever's happening between you and Whitmore, it's dragging the whole town into it. The town's been in it for 15 years. They just didn't know. What's that supposed to mean? Frank stepped closer, lowered his voice. Mike, you lost your family's farm 3 years ago. Foreclosure. Whitmore's bank. Jennings flinched like he'd been slapped. That's none of your business. It wasn't his business either, but he made it his business. He made it his business because he wanted your land cheap, and he got it. Frank's voice was steady. You want to know what really happened? You want to know why the bank suddenly called in your loan 6 months early? Why nobody else showed up at the auction to bid? Frank, come inside. Look at what we found. Then decide whose side you're on. The sheriff stood frozen for a long moment. Behind him, his cruiser's radio crackled with static. Then he stepped through the door. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Mike Jennings was sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, staring at Tommy Chen's laptop like it contained the secrets of the universe. 15 years, he whispered. 15 years, and nobody knew. Nobody wanted to know, Tommy said gently. Whitmore was careful. He spread it out. One foreclosure here, one there. Each one looked like bad luck or bad timing. By the time anyone might have noticed a pattern, he owned half the town. My father built that farm, Jennings's voice cracked. 60 years, 3 generations, gone because I couldn't make one payment. A payment he deliberately made impossible. Bobby leaned forward. The loan modification you applied for? The one the bank rejected? We found the internal emails. Whitmore personally blocked it. He wanted your property. Why? Why mine? Water rights. Tommy pulled up a map on the screen. Your farm sits on the largest aquifer in the county. There's a development company out of Dallas that's been buying up water rights all over Kansas. Whitmore sold your property to them for 8 times what he paid at auction. Jennings set down his coffee. His hands were shaking. "I'm going to kill him." "No," Big Mike said firmly, "you're not." Because that's what he'd expect from people like us. Violence, retaliation, something he can use to paint us as the villains. He leaned back. "We're going to do something much worse. We're going to expose him. We're going to destroy everything he's built. And we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he really is." "How?" "There's a reporter coming from Kansas City. She'll be here by noon." Big Mike looked at Frank. "We're going to give her everything, every document, every transaction, every name on every shell company. And then we're going to hold a town hall meeting and let the people of Miller's Creek decide what to do about it." Frank nodded slowly. Molly would have liked that. She always said the truth was the best disinfectant. Smart woman. The smartest. Jennings was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and put his hat back on. "The injunctions stayed. I can't shut you down even if I wanted to. But Frank?" He met Frank's eyes. "Whatever happens next, I've got your back. You've got my word on that." "Thank you, Mike." The sheriff nodded once and walked out. Through the window, they watched him get in his cruiser. But instead of driving away, he just sat there, staring straight ahead, probably thinking about a farm that should have been his, a legacy that had been stolen. "One more ally," Jake said quietly. "One more person who deserves the truth." Frank turned away from the window. "How do we spread the word about the town hall?" Big Mike smiled. "Leave that to us." Word spread through Miller's Creek like wildfire. By 10 a.m., everyone knew that something was happening at Molly's kitchen. By 11 a.m., the rumors had grown so wild that some people thought the Hells Angels were staging a coup. By noon, when the reporter from Kansas City arrived, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Torres, who looked at the bikers without flinching, half the town had gathered in the parking lot. Not inside, not yet. They stood at a safe distance, watching, waiting, trying to figure out what was happening and whether it was safe to get closer. Frank walked outside and raised his hands. "I know you're all wondering what's going on. I know some of you are scared. I know the rumors have been crazy." He paused. "But I'm asking you to come inside. There's something you need to see, something you need to know about this town and the man who's been running it." Nobody moved. Then Martha Chen stood up from her spot on a bench near the door. "I've known Frank Morrison for 31 years, she announced to the crowd. "He's never lied to me, never cheated me, never done anything but serve good coffee and treat people right." She started walking toward the diner. "If he says there's something we need to know, then I want to know it." She walked through the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then old Tom Bradley followed her. Then Jessica Reynolds with her toddler. Then the Hendersons, whose farm had been foreclosed 3 years ago. Then the Williamses, who'd lost their store. Then Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife, with confusion and fear on her face, but curiosity stronger than both. One by one, the people of Miller's Creek filed into Molly's kitchen until the diner was packed so tight that people were standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. Frank stood at the counter. Jake stood beside him. Behind them, the Hells Angels lined the back wall like a leather-clad honor guard. And in the middle of it all, with her laptop connected to the ancient TV that Molly had installed 15 years ago for customers who wanted to watch football, Rachel Torres prepared to show the town exactly what had been done to them. "Before we start," Frank said, "I want to say something." The room fell silent. 2 years ago, I lost my wife. Molly was the heart of this place, the heart of me. When she died, I thought about closing the diner, walking away, giving up. He paused. But she made me promise to keep fighting, to keep this place alive, to keep believing that there was still good in the world, even when it was hard to see. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "A week ago, a stranger walked through that door in the middle of a blizzard. He had nothing, no money, no hope. Nothing but the clothes on his back and a leather vest that made most people reach for their guns." Frank looked at Jake. "I fed him anyway, because that's what Molly would have done. Because hungry souls deserve hot food, and a man's dignity doesn't grow back once you've taken it. Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. That stranger became a friend. That friend called other friends. And those friends, Frank gestured at the bikers behind him, those friends rode through the night to help a man they'd never met, just because someone asked them to. He turned back to the crowd. I'm telling you this because what you're about to see is going to make you angry. It's going to make you scared. It's going to make you doubt everything you thought you knew about this town. But I want you to remember something. He pointed at Jake. I want you to remember that the man with the Hells Angels patches was more honest with me in 5 minutes than Harold Whitmore has been with any of us in 15 years. The room was dead silent. Rachel, Frank said, show them. The TV flickered to life, and the people of Miller's Creek learned the truth. 20 minutes later, the room was chaos. People were shouting, crying, demanding answers. Mrs. Patterson had collapsed into a chair, her face gray with shock. The Hendersons were holding each other, tears streaming down their faces. Old Tom Bradley was standing in the corner, fists clenched, looking like he wanted to punch through a wall. Rachel Torres stood at the front of the room, answering questions, explaining documents, laying out 15 years of fraud in terms that anyone could understand. The total amount stolen from Miller's Creek exceeds $23 million, she said. That includes foreclosed properties, rigged auctions, and kickbacks from developers. Judge Patterson received approximately $4.2 million in payments over the 15-year period. Harold Whitmore retained the rest. What about our properties? Someone shouted. Can we get them back? Some of them, possibly. Foreclosures obtained through fraud can be reversed, but it requires legal action. Individual lawsuits or potentially a class action. That'll take years. Yes, it will. So what do we do now? What happens to Whitmore? Rachel looked at Frank. Frank looked at Jake. Jake looked at Big Mike. Big Mike stepped forward. That depends on you, he said. We've got the evidence. We've got the story. Tomorrow morning, this is going to be on the front page of the Kansas City Star. By tomorrow afternoon, it'll be picked up by every news outlet in the state. By next week, Whitmore and Patterson will both be facing federal charges. But what about now? Old Tom demanded. What's stopping him from running? What's stopping him from burning the evidence and disappearing? We are. Big Mike's voice was calm, certain. Whitmore's house is being watched. The bank is being watched. Every exit out of this town has eyes on it. He's not going anywhere. You can do that? Big Mike smiled. Brother, we've got members in 43 states. We've got eyes everywhere. Harold Whitmore couldn't get to the Kansas border if he tried. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Then Frank spoke again. There's one more thing we need to do. Everyone looked at him. We need to confront him, directly, face to face. Frank's voice was steady. Not with violence, not with threats, just with the truth. I want to look that man in the eye and tell him exactly what he's done to this town, to these people, to my wife's dream. Frank, Jake said quietly, that might not be a good idea. Maybe not, but it's what I need. Frank looked around the room. It's what we all need. The chance to stand up to the man who's been stealing from us for 15 years and tell him that we know, that we're not afraid anymore, that we're not going to let him win. The silence stretched. Then Martha Chen spoke up. I'll go with you. Then old Tom. Me too. Then the Hendersons. Then the Williamses. Then a dozen others, voices overlapping, hands raising. Half the room wanted to confront Harold Whitmore. Big Mike looked at Frank with something like admiration. All right, he said, let's go have a conversation. The convoy moved through Miller's Creek like a parade. 15 motorcycles leading the way, a dozen cars and trucks following behind. Half the town rolling down Main Street toward the biggest house on the hill, Whitmore's house. They pulled up to the gates at 3:47 p.m. The sun was already starting to drop, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Frank got out of Jake's borrowed truck and walked to the intercom. He pressed the button. Static. Then a voice, clipped, irritated, familiar. "Who is this?" "Harold, it's Frank Morrison. We need to talk." A long pause. "I have nothing to say to you." "That's fine. I have plenty to say to you." Frank looked back at the crowd behind him. "And I brought some friends who have things to say too." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the gates began to open. Harold Whitmore was waiting for them on the front porch. He stood there in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks, looking like he just stepped out of a catalog for expensive retirement homes. But his face was pale. His hands were clenched at his sides. And his eyes were the eyes of a man who knew he was trapped. "This is trespassing," he said as Frank approached. "I'll have you all arrested." "Go ahead and try." Frank stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I don't think Sheriff Jennings is going to be very sympathetic. He just found out what you did to his family's farm." Whitmore's face went a shade paler. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Frank pulled out his phone and held it up. "Heartland Development LLC, shell companies, rigged auctions, Judge Patterson's cut." He scrolled through the documents. "It's all here, Harold. Every transaction, every payment, every lie." "Those are fabricated. My lawyers will." "Your lawyers can't help you." Big Mike stepped forward. "By tomorrow morning, this is going to be on the front page of every newspaper in Kansas. By next week, the FBI is going to be knocking on your door. And by next month," he smiled coldly, "by next month, you're going to be in a cell wondering how it all fell apart." Whitmore's composure cracked. Just for a second. But Frank saw it. The fear underneath the arrogance. The desperation behind the mask. "What do you want?" Whitmore asked. His voice had changed, smaller now, more desperate. "Money? Is that it? I can make this worth your while. All of you. Just name your price." Frank stared at him for a long moment. "My wife was worth more than anything you could offer," he said quietly. "She built something beautiful in this town, something that mattered, and you've been trying to tear it down for 15 years. Frank, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Frank's voice hardened. "A reasonable man would have let you destroy everything I love without lifting a finger. A reasonable man would have accepted defeat and walked away." He took a step forward. "But I'm not reasonable anymore, Harold. I'm angry. And I'm going to make sure that everyone in this state, everyone in this country, knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Whitmore's face contorted. The mask slipped completely now, revealing something ugly underneath. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this changes anything? I own this town. I own the bank. I own the judge. Even if you expose me, it'll take years to sort out. Years of lawsuits and appeals and legal battles. You'll be dead before any of these people see a dime." "Maybe," Frank shrugged, "but you'll be in prison, and that's enough for me." He turned to walk away. "Morrison!" Frank stopped, turned back. Whitmore was shaking now, actually shaking with rage. "You're making a mistake, a big mistake. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually, I do." Frank met his eyes one last time. "That's why I'm not afraid of you anymore." He walked back to the crowd, back to Jake and Big Mike and all the people of Miller's Creek who had finally seen the truth. Behind him, Harold Whitmore stood alone on his porch, watching his empire crumble. The sun set over Miller's Creek that night, and for the first time in 15 years, the town felt different. Not healed. Not yet. There was too much damage, too many wounds, too many years of stolen dreams and broken promises. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open. Hope. It was small and fragile and uncertain, but it was there. Frank stood behind the counter of Molly's kitchen, surrounded by bikers and neighbors and strangers who had become family, and he looked at the photographs on the wall. Molly smiling, Molly laughing, Molly standing in this exact spot 30 years ago. "We did it, sweetheart," he whispered. "We didn't let them win." Jake appeared beside him. You okay? Frank nodded slowly. Better than I've been in 2 years. You? I'm thinking. Jake stared at the photographs too. About what you said last night. About my daughter. Sarah? Yeah, Jake pulled out his phone. I've been carrying this picture for 7 years, waiting for the right moment, the perfect time. And you were right. There is no perfect time. Jake looked at Frank. When this is over, when we know the diner is safe, I'm going to Phoenix. To see her? To try. Jake's voice was rough. I don't know if she'll talk to me. I don't know if she'll even open the door. But I have to try. I have to stop running. Frank put a hand on his shoulder. That's the bravest thing I've heard you say. It's the most terrified I've ever been. That's how you know it matters. Outside, the sound of motorcycles rumbled through the night. More brothers arriving, more support, more evidence that kindness had a way of multiplying when you let it. Frank looked at Jake. Jake looked at Frank. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face it. The story hit the Kansas City Star at 6 a.m. the next morning. By 7 a.m., it had been picked up by every major news outlet in the state. By 9 a.m., CNN was running it as a headline. By noon, the parking lot of Molly's Kitchen was filled with news vans from as far away as Chicago and Denver. Frank stood behind the counter, watching the chaos through the window, feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life. This is insane, he muttered. Jake handed him a cup of coffee. This is justice. It just looks insane because we're not used to seeing it. Rachel Torres had done her job well. The article was devastating. 15 years of fraud laid out in meticulous detail, complete with bank records, shell company documents, and quotes from victims. Judge Patterson had been arrested at 5:30 a.m., pulled from his bed in handcuffs while his wife watched from the doorway. Whitmore was next, taken into custody at 7:15 a.m. after attempting to flee through his back gate and running straight into 3 Hells Angels who happened to be smoking cigarettes in his driveway. The photograph of Whitmore in handcuffs, his cashmere sweater rumpled and his face contorted with rage, was already going viral. But that wasn't the part that made Frank's chest tight. It was the other photographs. The ones of Miller's Creek residents standing outside Molly's Kitchen, holding signs that said things like, "Thank you, Frank," and "Molly's lives," and "Hell's Angels saved our town." It was the interviews with people he'd known for 30 years, talking about how the diner had always been the heart of the community, how Frank and Molly had fed people who couldn't pay, how the neon sign glowing red against the Kansas sky had been a beacon of hope for decades. It was Martha Chen, standing in front of the camera with tears streaming down her face, saying, "Frank Morrison is the best man I've ever known. And those bikers? They're heroes. Every last one of them." Big Mike had watched that clip 3 times, and each time his eyes got a little wetter. "Heroes," he muttered. "That's a first." The calls started coming at 8 a.m. First it was the local news, wanting interviews. Then the national news. Then something unexpected, a producer from a morning show in New York, asking if Frank would be willing to appear via satellite. Frank declined everything. "I'm not doing this for attention," he told Jake. "I'm doing this for Molly, for the town. The story's out there, that's enough." But the calls kept coming, and they weren't all from reporters. At 9:47 a.m., Tommy Chen walked into the diner with his laptop open and a look on his face that Frank couldn't quite read. "You need to see this," Tommy said. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was a website, GoFundMe. The page was titled "Save Molly's Kitchen" and featured a photograph of the diner that someone had taken at sunrise, the neon sign glowing warm against the gray morning sky. The goal was $50,000. The current total was $127,438. Frank's legs went weak. He grabbed the counter for support. "That can't be right." "It's right." Tommy's voice was hushed. "Someone set it up last night after the story broke. It's been climbing ever since. Donations from all over the country, $5 here, $10 there. A few big ones. There's a $1,000 donation from someone in California. Who started it? Tommy scrolled down to the organizer's name. Marcus Williams, Kansas City, Missouri. Jake let out a breath. Marcus, that son of a bitch. There's more. Tommy pulled up another tab. Look at the comments. Frank leaned in. Hundreds of messages. Thousands. My grandmother ran a diner in Ohio. This story reminded me of her. God bless you, Frank. I'm a Hell's Angel from Texas. Proud to call you brothers. Molly sounds like she was an amazing woman. Her legacy lives on. Donated $20 in memory of my father, who always said kindness was the only currency that mattered. Frank's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't understand, he whispered. These people don't even know me. They know enough. Jake put a hand on his shoulder. They know a man who fed a stranger in a blizzard. They know a woman who built something beautiful. They know a town that fought back against a bully. His voice softened. That's a story people want to be part of, Frank. That's a story people need. The donations kept climbing. By noon, they'd passed $200,000. By 3 p.m., they were closing in on $300,000. Frank couldn't process it. The numbers didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. He retreated to the kitchen, needing space, needing quiet. He found himself standing at the grill where Molly used to stand, running his hand over the metal surface she'd touched 1,000 times. I wish you could see this, he said to the empty room. I wish you could see what's happening. The kitchen door swung open. Jake stood there. Frank, there's someone here to see you. Another reporter? I told you I'm not. It's not a reporter. Jake's voice was strange, tight. You should just come. Frank followed him out to the main room. The diner had cleared out a bit. Most of the news crews had left to file their stories, and the locals had gone home for lunch. But standing at the counter, looking around with wide eyes and a hesitant expression, was a young woman. She was in her early 20s, dark hair, blue eyes that Frank recognized immediately because he'd seen them every day for the past week. Jake's eyes. Sarah? Jake's voice cracked on the name. The young woman turned. Her face cycled through a dozen emotions in 2 seconds. Shock, anger, fear, hope, pain, and something that looked like it might be longing. Dad! Nobody moved. Frank looked between them, father and daughter, separated by 7 years of silence, standing 10 feet apart in a diner in rural Kansas. How did you? Jake started. I saw the news. Sarah's voice was steady, but barely. You're all over the internet. Hell's Angel helped save small-town diner. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've spent 7 years trying to forget you exist, and then you're suddenly everywhere. Every channel, every website. Sarah, I flew in this morning, she cut him off. Rented a car at the Kansas City airport, drove 3 hours, and the whole way I kept asking myself what I was doing, why I was coming. Her voice wavered. I still don't have an answer. Jake took a step forward, stopped, like he was afraid she'd bolt if he got too close. You came, he said. That's what matters. No, what matters is that you left. The anger flashed now, hot and sudden. You left, Dad. You walked out when I was 15 years old, and you never came back. I know. I waited for you, her voice cracked. Every birthday, every Christmas. I told myself this would be the year you'd show up. This would be the time you'd actually keep your promise. Sarah, and you never did, not once. Tears were streaming down her face now. You just disappeared, like I didn't matter, like I was nothing. Frank started to back away, to give them privacy, but Jake shook his head slightly. Stay. You weren't nothing. Jake's voice was raw. You were everything. You're still everything. That's why I left. That doesn't make any sense. I know it doesn't. Jake took another step forward. Sarah didn't move away. I was a mess, Sarah. Drunk, high, angry at the world. Every time I looked at you, I saw all the ways I was failing you, all the promises I couldn't keep, all the things you deserved that I couldn't give. So you decided I'd be better off without you? Yes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Jake laughed, a broken sound, half sob. Yeah, I know. You don't get to decide what's better for me. Sarah's voice had dropped, quieter now, but no less intense. You don't get to make that choice and then walk away like some kind of martyr. I needed a father, not a perfect one, just one who showed up. I'm showing up now. It's been 7 years. I know. Jake's shoulders dropped. The fight went out of him. I know I can't fix it. I know I can't make up for the birthdays and the Christmases and all the times you needed me and I wasn't there. But Sarah, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, held it up so she could see the screen. The photograph, the last one he had of her. 15 years old, standing in front of a Christmas tree. I've carried this every day since you left, he said. Every single day. I've looked at it when I couldn't sleep. I've talked to it when I was alone on the road. I've apologized to it more times than I can count. Sarah stared at the photograph. Her face crumpled. Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness. Jake's voice was steady now, certain. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I'm just asking for a chance. One chance. To prove that I can be the father you deserved all along. The silence stretched between them. Frank held his breath. Then Sarah crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around her father. Jake caught her, held on like she might disappear if he let go. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry, baby girl, I'm so sorry. Shut up. Her voice was muffled against his chest. Just shut up and hold me. They stood there for a long moment, father and daughter, finally home. Frank wiped his eyes and turned away. This moment wasn't his. But he was grateful, so grateful, to have witnessed it. Molly would have loved this, he thought. She always said that broken things could be mended if you loved them enough. The afternoon brought more surprises. At 4:30 p.m., a convoy of vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Not motorcycles this time, trucks, work trucks, contractors' trucks. Big Mike walked outside to meet them, and when he came back in, he was grinning. Remember I said I knew some people? What did you do? Jake asked. Called in some favors. Mike gestured at the trucks. Roofers, electricians, plumbers, all brothers or friends of brothers. They're going to fix everything that's been falling apart in this place. Mike, I can't afford. Did I ask you for money? Mike held up a hand. This is what family does, Frank. We take care of each other. You've got a roof that leaks, wiring that's older than I am, and a plumbing system held together with duct tape and prayers. By tomorrow night, you're going to have a diner that's up to code and ready for the next 30 years. Frank opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know what to say. Say thank you and get out of their way. Mike clapped him on the shoulder. They work better without supervision. The work started immediately. Within an hour, the roof was being torn off and replaced with new shingles. The electrical panel was pulled out, and modern wiring started snaking through the walls. The ancient plumbing groaned one last time and then fell silent as new pipes took its place. Frank watched it all from a chair by the window, overwhelmed beyond words. Sarah sat with him. She decided to stay, at least for a few days. She and Jake had talked for 2 hours in the back booth, voices low, occasionally interrupted by tears or laughter, or both. They weren't healed, not yet, but they were healing. This is incredible, Sarah said, watching the workers swarm over the building. All these people, working for free. Not free. Jake sat down across from them. They're working for something more important than money. They're working for the story. The story? Your dad fed a stranger who had nothing, Jake said. That stranger had friends. Those friends had friends. And now, he gestured at the chaos around them. Now the story has grown into something nobody could have predicted. Sarah looked at her father with an expression Frank couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, or something close to it. "You know," she said slowly, "when I was little, I used to tell my friends that my dad was a superhero, a secret one. That's why he was always gone, because he was out saving the world." Jake's face crumpled. "Sarah, I stopped believing that when I was 12. Decided you were just a deadbeat who cared more about his motorcycle than his family." She paused. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you were a superhero all along. You just hadn't found the right world to save yet." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not a superhero. I'm just a man who made a lot of mistakes and got lucky enough to find a second chance." "That's what superheroes are, Dad." Sarah squeezed his hand. "People who screw up and then try to make it right. The cape is optional." Frank laughed out loud. He couldn't help it. The sound surprised him, rusty from disuse, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. Jake and Sarah looked at him. "Sorry," he said, wiping his eyes. "It's just..." Molly would have said the exact same thing. "She would have loved you, Sarah." "Tell me about her." Sarah leaned forward. "I want to know about the woman who built this place." So Frank told her. He told her about meeting Molly at a county fair in 1987, about their first date, coffee and pie at a diner that would eventually inspire the one they were sitting in, about building this place with their own hands, working nights and weekends while holding down day jobs. He told her about Molly's philosophy. Hungry souls deserve hot food. A man's dignity doesn't grow back. Every person who walks through that door is carrying something heavy. The least we can do is make their burden a little lighter. He told her about the cancer, the diagnosis, the 4 months that felt like 4 minutes and 4 lifetimes all at once. And he told her about the promise. "She made me swear," Frank said, his voice rough. "Right there in the hospital bed, 3 days before she died. She grabbed my hand and she said, 'Don't you let our dream die, Frank Morrison. Don't you give up.' So you didn't." "I tried not to." Frank looked around at the diner. Workers on the roof, workers in the walls. Life flowing through a building that had been slowly dying for 2 years. But I was losing, slowly, surely, every day a little more. And then Dad showed up. And then your dad showed up. Frank smiled at Jake. And everything changed. The sun set over Miller's Creek that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The workers had made incredible progress. The roof was done. The electrical was halfway finished. The plumbing was in better shape than it had been in decades. But more than the physical repairs, something else had happened. Something harder to measure. The town had come together. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were standing side by side, handing tools to contractors, making sandwiches for the work crew, sharing stories about what Molly's kitchen had meant to them over the decades. Old Tom Bradley had brought his entire hardware store inventory, every nail, screw, and bracket he had, and was distributing it for free. "Consider it payback for all the times Molly fed me when I couldn't afford to eat," he said. The Hendersons had set up a table of home-cooked food, making sure everyone stayed fed. "This is what Molly would have wanted," Mrs. Henderson said, tears in her eyes. "Taking care of people. That's what this place was always about." Even Sheriff Jennings had shown up, still in uniform, helping to move furniture and clear debris. "I spent 3 years hating myself for losing the farm," he admitted to Frank. "Turns out I was hating the wrong person. Whitmore stole from all of us. The least I can do is help rebuild what he tried to destroy." At 8 p.m., someone brought out a guitar. At 8:30, someone else produced a fiddle. By 9 p.m., there was an impromptu concert happening in the parking lot. Work crews and townspeople and Hell's Angels all mixed together, singing songs that some of them hadn't sung since they were children. Frank stood on the porch, watching it all, feeling like he might burst. Jake appeared beside him. "Hell of a day. Hell of a week." Frank shook his head. "I keep expecting to wake up, to find out this was all a dream." It's not a dream. Jake looked out at the crowd. It's what happens when you plant a seed of kindness and let it grow. Molly planted that seed 30 years ago. You've been watering it ever since. All I did was help it find the sunlight. That's poetic for a biker. I have hidden depths, Frank laughed. Then his laughter faded into something softer. Jake? Yeah. Thank you, Frank's voice cracked. For everything. For walking through that door. For staying. For fighting. For... He gestured helplessly at the scene in front of them. For all of this. Thank me? Jake turned to face him. Frank, you saved my life. I'm not exaggerating. That night in the blizzard, I wasn't planning to make it through. I'd given up. On myself. On everything. Walking through the snow, I figured if I died, at least it would be over. Frank's chest tightened. Jake, you gave me a meal, and a bed, and something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Jake's voice was rough. I can't repay that with money or work or even this circus. He waved at the crowd. But I can try to be worthy of it. I can try to be the man you saw when you looked at me instead of the man I thought I was. Frank didn't have words. He pulled Jake into a hug instead. They stood there for a long moment, two men who had been strangers a week ago, now closer than brothers. Behind them, the music swelled. The crowd sang. The stars emerged one by one over Miller's Creek. And Molly's kitchen, battered, rebuilt, reborn, glowed warm against the Kansas night. The final tally came in at midnight. The GoFundMe had reached $412,000. $412,000. From strangers all over the country, all over the world. Frank sat at the counter, staring at the number on Tommy's laptop, unable to process what he was seeing. That's enough to pay off the mortgage, Tommy said quietly. Clear all your debts, fund operations for the next 3 years, and still have money left over. This has to be a mistake. It's not a mistake. Tommy turned the laptop around, showing him the donor list. Look at these names, these stories. People who've never been to Kansas, never heard of Miller's Creek. They saw your story and they wanted to be part of it. Frank scrolled through the comments, reading them through blurry eyes. For Molly, $25. Because kindness matters, $50. My grandfather was a biker. He would have loved this story, $100. Watching from Tokyo, faith in humanity restored, $10. Thousands of messages, thousands of acts of generosity from people he would never meet. I don't deserve this, Frank whispered. That's not for you to decide. Big Mike sat down next to him. That's for the people who gave it to decide, and they decided you were worth it. But I didn't do anything special. I just fed a hungry man. That's the most special thing anyone can do. Mike's voice was soft. In a world that tells us to look out for number one, you looked out for a stranger. In a world that says some people don't deserve help, you helped anyway. That's not nothing, Frank. That's everything. Frank stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop. I need some air, he said. He walked outside past the sleeping work crews and the quiet motorcycles and the remnants of the impromptu concert. He walked until he reached the edge of the parking lot, where the lights of the diner gave way to the darkness of the Kansas plains. He stood there looking up at the stars. Molly, he said to the sky, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if any of this makes sense, but I want you to know I kept my promise. I didn't give up. And look what happened. The wind whispered through the grass. The stars glittered cold and distant. I miss you, Frank continued, every day, every minute. But I think I understand now what you were trying to teach me all those years. About kindness, about community, about how one small act can change the world. He wiped his eyes. I'm going to keep going, Molly. I'm going to keep this place alive, not just for you, for everyone. For all the hungry souls who need a hot meal and a kind word. He paused. And I'm going to keep believing in people, in goodness, in miracles. He took a deep breath. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for. The wind picked up, warm and gentle, like a hand brushing his cheek. Frank smiled. Then he turned and walked back toward the lights. There was work to do. And for the first time in 2 years, he couldn't wait to do it. 3 months had passed since the blizzard that changed everything. Frank stood behind the counter of Molly's kitchen at 5:30 a.m., same as always, but nothing else was the same. The roof didn't leak anymore. The lights didn't flicker. The coffee maker, brand new, donated by a Hells Angels chapter in Nebraska, hummed quietly in the corner. And the diner was full. Not just regulars, not just the loyal few who'd kept the place alive through the lean years. The booths were packed with truckers and travelers and bikers who'd ridden hundreds of miles just to eat breakfast at that place from the news. The story had spread far beyond Kansas. It had become something bigger than Frank ever imagined, a symbol of hope, of community, of what happens when ordinary people refuse to give up. Jake pushed through the kitchen door with 3 plates balanced on one arm. "Order up," he called. "Table 7, table 12, and Martha's usual." Frank grabbed Martha's plate, black coffee and a blueberry muffin, same as every morning for 31 years, and carried it to her spot at the counter. "You're getting slow, Frank Morrison," Martha said, but she was smiling. "I'm getting old, Martha Chen. There's a difference." "There's no difference. Both end the same way." She took a sip of her coffee and nodded approvingly. "But at least the coffee's better now." Frank laughed and turned back to the chaos of the breakfast rush. This was his life now. This was what Molly's dream had become. The bell above the door jingled, and Frank looked up automatically. He developed a habit of watching for new faces, curious about who would walk in next. Yesterday it had been a family from Oregon who'd driven 2 days just to shake his hand. The day before, a documentary crew from Los Angeles wanting to film a story about the diner that saved itself. But this time, the face wasn't new at all. Big Mike Castellano walked in, leather vest gleaming with patches, beard neatly trimmed for once. "Coffee," he said, settling onto a stool. "Black, and whatever pie you've got." "It's 6 a.m., Mike." "And?" Frank shook his head and cut a slice of apple pie. "You rode all the way from Oklahoma City for breakfast?" "I rode all the way from Oklahoma City for the grand opening." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" Frank had almost forgotten. Today was the day. 3 months of planning, 3 months of construction, 3 months of phone calls and permits and meetings that made his head spin. Today, Miller's Creek was unveiling its new community center, built on land that Harold Whitmore had once owned, funded by a combination of recovered stolen assets and donations from across the country. And it was named after Molly. "The Molly Morrison Community Center," Frank said quietly. "Still doesn't feel real." "It's real." Mike took a bite of pie. "I was here yesterday when they put up the sign. Damn near made me cry, and I don't cry." "Liar." "Okay, I cried a little, but I was alone, so it doesn't count." The morning flew by in a blur of orders and conversations, and the controlled chaos that had become Frank's new normal. By 10 a.m., the breakfast rush had died down, and Frank found himself with a rare moment of quiet. He used it to slip into the back and check his phone. 3 messages from Sarah, all photos. The first showed her apartment in Phoenix, boxes stacked against the walls, half unpacked. The second showed a moving truck. The third showed a road sign, "Welcome to Kansas." She was coming home, not to Miller's Creek exactly. She'd taken a job at a marketing firm in Kansas City, but close enough. Close enough to visit on weekends. Close enough to be part of Jake's life again. Frank smiled at the phone. "She's on her way," Jake said from behind him. Frank turned. "You knew?" "She texted me an hour ago. Should be here by early afternoon." Jake's voice was different now, lighter, somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "She's bringing someone, a boyfriend apparently, Some guy named David. You okay with that? I'm okay with anything that makes her happy, Jake paused. I'm just grateful she's letting me be part of it. The past 3 months had changed Jake in ways that were hard to quantify. He still wore the leather vest, still had the Hells Angels patches, but something in his eyes had shifted, the haunted look replaced by something warmer. He'd started going to meetings, AA twice a week, at the Methodist Church on Oak Street. He'd started calling Sarah every Sunday, rebuilding the relationship one conversation at a time. He'd started talking about the future like it was something he wanted to be part of, instead of something he was running from. And he'd stayed. That was the part that surprised Frank the most. After everything that had happened, the media circus, the national attention, the hundreds of job offers that had flooded in, Jake had stayed in Miller's Creek. Why? Frank had asked him once. Because this is where I found myself, Jake had answered. Why would I leave? The grand opening of the community center was scheduled for 2 p.m. By 1:30, it seemed like the entire town had gathered on Main Street. Not just locals. There were visitors from all over Kansas, reporters from a dozen outlets, and a contingent of Hells Angels that had grown to nearly 50 members. Frank walked through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling overwhelmed by all of it. This is your doing, he kept telling people, not mine. This town came together. The bikers came together. Everyone contributed. But they kept thanking him anyway. Sheriff Jennings found him near the podium that had been set up for the dedication ceremony. Hell of a turnout, Jennings said. Hell of a day. You nervous? Frank considered the question. Terrified. Good. That means you're human. Jennings clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, you've earned this, Frank. Everything that's happening today, you made it possible. I served some meatloaf to a stranger, that's all. That's everything, Jennings smiled. That's the whole point. At 1:47 p.m., a car pulled into the parking lot and Sarah emerged with a young man in tow. Tall, nervous-looking, clutching a bouquet of flowers like a shield. Jake froze when he saw them. Dad! Sarah waved and started toward him. Dad, this is David. David, this is my father. David extended a trembling hand. Mr. Brennan, it's an honor to meet you. Sarah's told me so much about everything. Jake looked at the hand, looked at David, looked at the flowers. Those for me? He asked. David's face went pale. What? No, Relax. Jake shook his hand firmly. I'm messing with you. Welcome to Miller's Creek, David. You hurt my daughter and I'll bury you in the Kansas prairie. Other than that, we're good. Dad! Sarah punched his arm. What? I'm being honest. That's what you always wanted, right? David looked like he might faint, but Sarah was laughing, and Jake was smiling, and somehow it all worked. Frank watched the scene from a distance, heart full. This was family. Messy, complicated, imperfect family. The kind worth fighting for. At 2 p.m. sharp, Mayor Thompson, elected 3 weeks ago after the previous mayor resigned in disgrace over his connections to Whitmore, stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, welcome to the grand opening of the Molly Morrison Community Center. Applause erupted. Frank felt his throat tighten. 3 months ago, the mayor continued, our town was dying. We didn't know it, but we were being systematically destroyed by men we trusted. Men who were supposed to protect us. She paused. But then something happened. Something extraordinary. She gestured toward the diner, visible in the distance, neon sign glowing even in daylight. A stranger walked into Molly's kitchen on a cold winter night. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and a leather vest that made most people lock their doors. But Frank Morrison didn't lock his door. He opened it wider. He fed that stranger, gave him a place to sleep, treated him like a human being when the whole world had told him he wasn't one. Frank looked at Jake. Jake was staring at the ground, jaw tight. That single act of kindness, the mayor said, set off a chain reaction that none of us could have predicted. It brought help when we needed it most. It exposed corruption that had been poisoning our town for 15 years, and it reminded us of something we'd forgotten, that Miller's Creek isn't just a place, it's a family. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Molly Morrison understood that. She built her diner on the principle that every person who walks through the door deserves dignity, respect, and a hot meal. She believed that kindness was contagious, that one small act could change the world. The mayor smiled. She was right. She turned and gestured to the building behind her, the community center, freshly painted, gleaming in the afternoon sun. This building is dedicated to her memory, but it's also dedicated to all of you, to everyone who contributed, everyone who believed, everyone who refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. She paused. And it's dedicated to the man who made it all possible. Frank Morrison, would you please come up here? Frank's feet didn't want to move. Jake appeared beside him and gave him a gentle push. Go on. You've earned this. Frank walked to the podium on legs that felt like rubber. The crowd parted for him, hands reaching out to touch his shoulders, pat his back, offer encouragement. He reached the podium and turned to face them. All these people, all these faces, all waiting for him to say something. His mind went blank. Then he looked at the community center, at the sign above the door, Molly Morrison Community Center. And suddenly he knew exactly what to say. When I was 26 years old, Frank began, I met a woman at a county fair who changed my life. She had red hair and a laugh that could fill a room and absolutely no patience for nonsense. Her name was Molly, and from the moment I saw her, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life making her happy. The crowd was quiet. We built that diner together. Every board, every nail, every late night and early morning. She used to say it wasn't about the food, it was about the connection, the chance to make someone's day a little brighter, the opportunity to show people that they mattered. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. When she got sick, I thought my world was ending. When she died, I thought it had ended. I spent 2 years just existing, going through the motions, keeping the lights on because I'd promised her I would, not because I believed it mattered anymore. He looked at Jake, standing in the crowd with Sarah on one side and Big Mike on the other. Then one night, in the middle of a blizzard, a man walked through my door who had even less reason to believe than I did. He was frozen, broke, running from himself, and I made a choice. I chose to feed him anyway. I chose to believe that kindness still mattered. I chose to keep my promise to Molly. Frank took a deep breath. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know that one plate of meatloaf would lead to all of this. He gestured at the crowd, the community center, the town that had come back to life. But Molly would have known. She always said that kindness was like a seed. You plant it without knowing what it will become, and then you trust. He paused. So that's what I'm asking all of you to do. Plant seeds. Be kind to strangers. Feed hungry souls. Give people second chances when the world tells you not to. Because you never know, the person you help today might be the one who saves you tomorrow. He looked at the building one more time. This community center isn't a monument to me or even to Molly. It's a monument to all of you, to what we can accomplish when we refuse to give up on each other. His voice strengthened. Miller's Creek isn't dying anymore. It's being reborn. And as long as there are people willing to plant seeds of kindness, it always will be. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. Frank stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed, and found himself surrounded by people wanting to hug him, thank him, tell him how much his words had meant. Through the crowd, he caught Jake's eye. Jake nodded once. That was enough. The party lasted until well past dark. There was food, mountains of it, contributed by everyone in town and several neighboring towns as well. There was music, the same impromptu band that had played in the parking lot 3 months ago, now joined by a dozen other musicians. There was dancing and laughing and storytelling and the sound of a community celebrating its own survival. Frank slipped away around 9 p.m., needing a moment of quiet. He walked back to Molly's kitchen, dark now with the "closed for private event" sign in the window. He let himself in with his key and stood in the empty diner, surrounded by ghosts and memories. The photographs were still there. Molly smiling, Molly laughing, Molly standing in this exact spot 30 years ago. But there were new photographs now, too. The Hells Angels gathered in the parking lot that first morning. The town hall meeting where everything changed. The contractors rebuilding the roof. Sarah hugging Jake for the first time in 7 years. The GoFundMe total hitting $500,000. And one new one, hung just this morning, Frank and Jake standing behind the counter together, both wearing aprons, both grinning like idiots. "We did it, Molly," Frank whispered. "We really did it." The door opened behind him. Jake walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Figured I'd find you here," he handed Frank a cup. "Hiding from your own party?" Taking a breather, Frank accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's a lot to process." "Tell me about it." Jake sat down in the nearest booth. "You know, 3 months ago I was walking through a blizzard, hoping I wouldn't make it to morning. Now I've got my daughter back. I've got a job I actually like. I've got friends who aren't impressed by my rap sheet or scared of my patches. Sounds like a pretty good deal. Best deal I ever made." Jake sipped his coffee. "And I owe it all to a plate of meatloaf." Frank sat down across from him. "You owe it to yourself. You could have walked away at any point. You chose to stay. So did you. When Whitmore was threatening you, when the foreclosure was closing in, when it would have been easier to just give up." Jake shook his head. "You chose to keep fighting. Molly wouldn't let me quit." "Molly's not here, Frank. You made that choice yourself." Jake leaned forward. "That's what I finally understand now. We can honor the people we've lost, but we can't hide behind them. At some point, we have to decide who we want to be, and then become that person, one choice at a time." Frank stared at him for a long moment. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been going to AA meetings with a 90-year-old Korean War veteran who won't stop talking about philosophy. Some of it was bound to rub off." Frank laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from somewhere deep. "So what happens now?" he asked when the laughter faded. "Now we keep going," Jake shrugged. "We open the diner tomorrow. We serve breakfast to whoever walks through the door. We treat people with dignity and feed hungry souls and plant seeds of kindness wherever we can." "Just like that?" "Just like that," Jake smiled. "That's the secret, Frank. That's what Molly was trying to teach you all along. The big moments are made up of small ones. The grand gestures are built from ordinary kindness. You don't change the world all at once. You change it one plate of meatloaf at a time." Frank looked around the diner, at the photographs, the clean counters, the coffee maker humming in the corner. "She would have loved you, Jake." "I know." Jake's voice was soft. "She already did, through you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 men who had started as strangers and become family. Then Jake stood. "Come on, Sarah's looking for us. She wants to introduce David to the Hells Angels, and I have a feeling he's going to need moral support." "That poor kid. He'll survive, probably," Jake grinned. "If he's going to be part of this family, he needs to learn what he's getting into." Family. The words settled into Frank's chest like a warm coal. He had a family again. Not the one he'd lost, but a new one, built from scratch, forged in crisis, held together by something stronger than blood. He followed Jake out the door and into the night. The party was still going strong. Music and laughter filled the air. Somewhere in the crowd, Big Mike was teaching Martha Chen how to do a motorcycle burnout, which seemed like a terrible idea but was generating a lot of cheering. Sarah spotted them and waved. "Dad, Frank, over here!" They walked toward her, toward David, who still looked vaguely terrified, toward the crowd of bikers and townspeople and strangers who had become neighbors. Frank paused at the edge of the gathering and looked back at Molly's kitchen one last time. The neon sign glowed red against the night sky. The windows were dark, but tomorrow they'd be bright again, filled with the light of new days and new chances and new seeds waiting to be planted. "Thank you," he whispered to the building, to Molly, to whatever force in the universe had sent a frozen biker stumbling through his door on the worst night of the worst winter he could remember. Then he turned and walked into the crowd, ready for whatever came next. Miller's Creek was alive again, and so was Frank Morrison. The next morning, Frank woke at 4:30 a.m., same as always, but instead of dread, he felt anticipation. Instead of exhaustion, he felt energy. Instead of the gray fog that had settled over his life for 2 years, he felt clarity. He got dressed, made himself a cup of coffee, and drove to the diner in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake was already there, lights on, grill heating up. "You're early," Frank said. "Couldn't sleep." Jake handed him an apron. "Big day, first day of the rest of our lives and all that." "You've been watching too many inspirational movies." "Sarah made me watch The Shawshank Redemption last night. I'm feeling motivated." Frank laughed and tied on his apron. Through the window, he could see the first hints of sunrise painting the eastern sky. At 5:30 a.m., they unlocked the front door. Martha Chen was waiting on the porch, crossword puzzle in hand. "You're late," she said. "I've been standing here for 3 minutes." "We open at 5:30, Martha." "It's 5:30. In my day, businesses opened when customers arrived." But she was smiling as she walked past him to her usual spot at the counter. "Coffee, strong, and don't make me wait." Frank poured her coffee, black, same as every morning for 31 years and counting. The day unfolded the way days do in a small-town diner. Customers arriving, orders cooking, conversations flowing. But something was different now. The desperation was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was something Frank hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Peace. At noon, a group of bikers rolled in, a Hells Angels chapter from Colorado, passing through on their way to a rally in Missouri. "Heard about this place," the leader said, a grizzled man in his 60s with a beard down to his chest. "Had to see it for ourselves." "Welcome to Molly's Kitchen," Jake said. "What can I get you?" "Whatever's good. We've been riding since dawn." Jake nodded and headed for the kitchen. Frank watched the bikers settle into the big corner booth, removing their gloves, stretching their road-stiff muscles. 3 months ago, a scene like this would have emptied the diner. Now the other customers barely looked up. Hell's Angels at Molly's Kitchen had become as normal as farmers in work boots or families with sticky-fingered children. That was the real miracle, Frank realized. Not the money or the media attention or the community center with Molly's name on it. The real miracle was that people had learned to see past the patches. At 3 p.m., during the afternoon lull, Frank took a break and walked out back. There was a bench there now, donated by Big Mike's chapter, installed by Jake, positioned to face the open Kansas plains. Frank sat down and let his eyes rest on the horizon. The door opened behind him. Footsteps approached. Jake sat down beside him. "Good day," Jake said. "Good day," Frank agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift across the endless sky. "I got a letter this morning," Jake finally said. "From?" "The parole office in Oklahoma City. My records being reviewed for early expungement. Given my community service contributions and demonstrated rehabilitation." Jake laughed. "Turns out saving a town from a corrupt banker counts as community service." "That's great news." "It is." Jake paused. "It means I could vote again, get a passport, apply for jobs without checking that box." "Are you going somewhere?" Jake shook his head. "No, I'm exactly where I want to be." He looked at Frank. "I just like having options. For the first time in my life, I've got options." "What are you going to do with them?" "Same thing I've been doing. Cook breakfast, wash dishes, be a father to Sarah, be a friend to you." Jake smiled. "Plant seeds." Frank felt something warm bloom in his chest. Molly would have loved that answer. Molly would have told me to stop being sappy and get back to work. Jake stood. Speaking of which, the dinner rush starts in an hour, and we're almost out of potatoes. Frank stood too, joints protesting as they always did. Then let's get to work. They walked back inside together, through the kitchen door, into the warmth and noise and life of Molly's kitchen. The neon sign flickered on as the evening deepened, red letters against the blue Kansas sky. Inside, the diner was full again. Regulars and newcomers, bikers and farmers, families and lonely travelers. All of them eating together, talking together, being human together. Frank moved through the crowd, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, greeting faces old and new. At the counter, Martha Chen finished her crossword and looked up. 27 across, she said, 6 letters. What a stranger can become. Frank thought for a moment. Family, he said. Martha smiled and wrote it in. Through the window, Frank could see the community center in the distance, lights glowing warm against the gathering dark. He could see the parking lot full of motorcycles and pickup trucks. He could see Jake through the kitchen window, laughing at something Sarah said while David carefully learned how to flip an omelet. He could see Miller's Creek, alive and thriving and full of possibility. And somewhere, in a place beyond seeing, he knew Molly was watching too. The bell above the door jingled. Frank turned, ready to greet whoever walked in. A young woman stood in the doorway, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a backpack that had seen better days. She hesitated, looking around at the crowded diner like she wasn't sure she belonged. Frank smiled and grabbed a menu. "Welcome to Molly's Kitchen," he said. "Take any seat you like. We're glad you're here." The woman's face softened. Just a little. Just enough. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been traveling a long time. This is the first place that's felt like somewhere I could stop. That's what we're here for." Frank led her to a booth by the window. "Now, what can I get you?" "I don't know. What's good?" Frank thought about meatloaf, about blizzard, about frozen bikers and impossible odds, and the strange, beautiful ways that kindness multiplied when you let it. "Everything's good," he said, "but if you want my honest recommendation, start with the meatloaf. It's my wife's recipe. People come from all over the country for it." The woman smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd walked in. "Meatloaf sounds perfect." Frank wrote down the order and headed for the kitchen. Behind him, the bell jingled again. More customers, more hungry souls, more seeds waiting to be planted. He pushed through the kitchen door where Jake was already firing up the grill. "One meatloaf special," Frank called out. "Coming right up," Jake answered, and outside the neon sign glowed steady against the Kansas night. A beacon for all the lost travelers and frozen strangers and hungry souls who needed a place to rest. Molly's Kitchen was open, and it always would be, because kindness doesn't die, it multiplies. One plate at a time, one stranger at a time, one choice at a time. That was Molly's lesson. That was Frank's legacy. And somewhere out there, riding through the darkness toward a light they hadn't found yet, the next stranger was already on their way. The door would be open when they arrived. It always was.